86% of D1 student college athletes end up on the line of poverty while in a sports team and after retirement. Today, my colleagues and I will be speaking about compensation for college athletes. My name is Fabiana Liberata.
I'm Gia Radio.
I'm Sarah Khan.
And I'm Sophia Marquez.
And our presentation will aim to answer the following question. Explain why or why not a D1 student athlete who obtains a 2.5 GPA or higher should be compensated for their performance on the matter of the organization known as the NCAA and the student-athlete relationship itself.
And the solution is compensating D1 student athletes who obtain a 2.5 GPA or higher based on revenue of the school, accommodating to time and needs, public opinion, and future attractions.
First, we'll be considering school revenue. The average D1 football player generates $166,067 for their school. This is leaving the average D1 football team to generate $29.5 million. The average cost of tuition for a D1 school is $25,000. If you bring your attention to the chart on the right and you focus on the top line, which represents a Texas football player, they generate up to $666,029 in revenue. And then if you bring your attention to the very bottom, Arkansas, the average player generates $354,266. Let's use this as an example today. The cost of tuition at the University of Arkansas is $25,872. Some may argue that tuition cost is compensation for an athlete to be entering into the school, but this really just creates an illusion that the athlete is of benefit while the university is still profiting over $300,000 off of each student athlete, while adding a desk to the classroom is way cheaper than the profits that they will be accumulating. Nike sponsors 78 of the 128 college football teams. This is a majority of 61.7% of apparel sponsored by Nike. This includes schools like Alabama, Florida, Florida State, Ohio State, LSU, and USC, who have all won multiple championships from 1998 to 2017, all while wearing a Nike uniform. If you direct your focus to the chart on the left, and you bring your attention to the yellow and orange sections, which make up of 32% of revenue for the NCAA, these represent media rights, royalties, and licensing. Schools make 10% royalties from each jersey sold. Schools will use the name and number of players along with the title of the university on the jersey to make profit. The university and the NCAA profit off of each jersey or paraphernalia sold, although the athlete cannot sell or make any money off of their own materials.
Continuing on, in 2002, the D1 student athlete graduate was 74%. It reached its high in 2018 at 88%. According to the National Collegiate Athletic Association, over the past 16 years, 25,981 more college student athletes graduated than would have ever been expected. As you can see on the graph, the light blue line shows the number of D1 student graduates versus the number that was expected based on previous years, shown by the dark blue line. The increased amount was 349 additional student athletes. The numbers already show progression in the rate of graduates. Although the percentage has risen, many athletes continue to drop out before completing all 4 terms. It is also observed that with the amount of practice hours, some student athletes barely focus on their education anymore, which puts them at a disadvantage for an outside future career. Moving on, I will be talking about how both the school and students can help each other. According to Tom Huddleston, who has a long history in focusing on sports finance, he states a platform to showcase their skills for professional teams advocate that paying college athletes point out that these player skills bring in more than $14 billion in annual revenue for sports programs. College athletes work in and day out. Some manage to keep 30-hour week practices, keep a 2.5 GPA, and have jobs. As you look at the graph, it shows how much money these athletes bring in depending on the school. The graph shows that the University of Austin, Texas, has the highest in sports revenue at $210.4 million. Yet athletes do not receive a small percentage of these profits, a percentage in which can help many athletes who cannot afford basic necessary expenses. Now you ask yourself, what good would this do for the school and not just the student? Compensating D1 student athletes will increase the number of interested players for the school. The more players that are interested and accepted to the school, the higher amount of the profit. Money would also help the team and school developments.
Going off of what has already been discussed about the economic status of the organization, there's also a matter of the academic controversial history behind the organization known as the NCAA. Specifically looking at an example of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill for allegations of academic fraud from 2010 to 2017. Within this time frame, there was also the case of O'Bannon v. NCAA, a matter of a sports player versus the organization suing over lack of compensation. The academic fraud regarding this university was that a shadow curriculum of paper or fake classes had been created within the sports department of the university as a means of boosting graduate rates and overall GPA for their student athletes. This represents an unfair treatment of the status known as a student athlete in the professional relationship with the organization. If the athlete is already capable of making the 2.5 GPA that is required to be a D1 college student athlete, why is the need necessary to be committing such academic fraud and not facing any severe outcome as demonstrated by the court reading in 2017? And the organization itself refused to disclose any information or insight as to how they felt on the matter. They regard that even though the student athletes are within their organization's domain, it is a matter of the university to deal with, even though that shouldn't be the case here. And with that reputation also comes the matter of considering demographics and public opinion, politically speaking. A survey conducted by the Washington Post and the University of Massachusetts Lowell, or UML, found that the majority of individuals responded believing that scholarships under that organization were adequate compensation for their college athletes. But of the minority who voted otherwise, those were in favor of revenue from the schools already being generated, as described earlier, in larger amounts, regardless of whether or not the college was higher level, but also in allowing for outside endorsements and sponsorships to occur where compensation could be favorable to the student athlete themselves. And of this minority, there's also a matter of considering how the majority of respondents were demographically located based on the map provided. We can see that the majority of them were located in the southern and southeast and Midwest United States, the majority also being African American or of non-Latino descent, a matter that becomes very important when you consider how most white Americans voted for scholarships to be adequate compensation, while the majority who were not, in this instance, the African American majority, voted otherwise.
According to the NCAA, in Division I, the academic to athletic breakdown is 37.3 hours per week to 35.4 hours per week. This shows how D1 athletes are spending as much time on their sport as they would a full-time job. Athletes are putting all these hours into training, practicing, and playing their sports, which can take a heavy toll on their bodies. The CDC even stated that among all sports, men's football accounted for the largest annual estimated number of injuries and the highest competition injury rate, which is about 39.9 per 1,000 athletes that are exposed. These injuries can lead to conditions or health problems that could affect the athlete for the rest of their lives. The NCAA also stated that only 2% of student athletes in all sports go on to compete professionally. This indicates that the majority of college athletes end their athletic careers after college and do not advance to make a career out of it. This can be a harsh reality for student athletes to face after they work so hard to play at the next level but do not achieve this. Some student athletes even face depression or other mental health issues after their career ends. Many have no idea what their next steps are because during their college careers, they were focused on their sport and not exploring any other co-curricular activities or looking into their future. If athletes were receiving compensation from college sports, they could save it so that they could finish with a degree and potentially some savings for their future. This could potentially prevent future financial problems and prevent having school debt.
Some limitations to our solution may include less playing time, injuries, and less attention to smaller schools. As previously discussed, less playing time and injuries can play into each other. This may lead to less revenue generated per player and by school. This may also lead to less viewing time, less ticket sales, and less jersey sales per season, which would also lead to less revenue generated. This may bring less attraction to the smaller schools if larger schools, as previously stated, Texas and Florida, are being more broadcasted and known for their higher compensation rates. Then athletes may not bring as much attention to the smaller schools that need Division I players as well.
Here are a few of our failed solutions. The first failed solution was that practice hours should be reduced to at least 3 hours to allow time for academic studies and social interactions. However, we decided not to proceed with this solution because we collectively decided as a group that the less amount of practice hours will potentially put the sports teams at risk at lowering their performance ranks level.
The second failed solution we found was in the idea of changing the rules under the NCAA administration based on allegations toward revenue and education. While this seems a promising potential, the issue here arises in that there is not much we can do in regarding what the organization does themselves. It's a matter of their administration to choose whether or not they want to deny or disclose any information regarding those allegations that have been previously made. The cases have been proposed and the cases have been introduced to them on what exactly has occurred within their own organization and universities, but again, is not within anyone else's domain except for them to make a matter out of it.
Thank you. Is there any questions at this time?
Yep, I do have a question for each one of you. Gia, you're going to be up first. My question for you is, describe how the content of the team's presentation changed as a result of your conversations.
The content of our group presentation changed as a result of discussion was that we originally had one of the solutions that Sarah had previously stated, but we decided that as we researched more and more, we could not find a sufficient amount, and as she just stated, it was deemed as unreliable for us to use. We couldn't find enough information on a whole solution for that through each of our lens and perspectives. So we did decide to further research and find a better solution that would better fit all of our claims and all of our perspectives.
All right, thanks. Fabiana, in the future, what would you change about your group norms and how would you expect that to improve your presentation?
I think to improve our group norms, we would switch around, obviously, the roles that we each had. For example, I had secretary, Sarah had communications, and Gia had, basically she took on a leadership role. So I would say maybe that next time I could be better at taking on communications, and maybe Sarah can take that role in leadership and see how we work in different areas.
All right. So let's go to Sarah next then. In what way did you improve your ability to work with a group as a result of this project?
I would say that my ability improved because of who specifically I was grouped with in this aspect. All three of my members, but more specifically certain aspects of each of them, like for example, what Gia's paper was discussing or the statistics that Fabiana provided on graduation rates, really helped me to see that there are certain things that I have only been doing within my limitation of doing like a historical or political lens, that in going outside of that with an economic or societal standpoint might prove better in the future to consider and might make it more effective.
All right, and save the best for last, right, Sophia? Describe an argument from one of your peers' individual reports that makes you think different about the conclusion your group came up with.
One of the arguments that my peers made was the one that Sarah made, where she was looking further into the racial gaps. She was saying basically that people of a white race are more in favor of just accepting scholarships as to also receiving compensation. And that further helped my research because I was looking into the future and how receiving compensation can help people of a certain economic background.